Happy New Year, White Sox fans, and welcome to our first Believe in White Sox of 2026. It's been a little while, but I got busy with work again, so you got to forgive me a little bit there. We do have the Rule 5 draft to talk about, and we're going to do that in the second segment of the show. But the first part of the show highlights two guys, one in particular, that the White Sox have acquired. And the first guy being Munetaka Murakami, the Japanese slugger that has signed a 2-year, $34 million contract with the White Sox. And the thing that intrigues me about this contract is that I think a lot of people probably could have ended up paying him more and given him more years, but this may end up being a guy that wants to bet on himself, that's only 25 years old and feels as if he probably can get a bigger contract in his second deal should he be able to figure out a way to cut down on the strikeouts. The power in 8 seasons of Japanese baseball is unquestioned. In 892 games, he hit 246 homers as part of the NPB, and he had seasons where he'd hit 35 plus homers. He had a season in 2022 with Yakult where he ended up hitting 56 homers and drove in 134 runs. He had a stretch from 2021 to 2024 of 4 consecutive 30 homer seasons. And this is over the course of 143 games. This isn't 162 games. This is 143 game seasons. Their seasons are shorter over there. And he was great in his introductory press conference. He wants to be a White Sox and is endearing himself to the fans. His interview with Chuck Garfien about him having a lot of power. I mean, that season he hit 56 home runs. He had 25 intentional walks. 25 intentional walks. His on base that year was 458. 318 average with a 458 on base in 2022. Now, 2025 was a down year for him. He only played in 69 games, hit 24 homers still. And when you think about hitting 24 homers over the course of not even 70 games, just goes to show the kind of power that he's going to have. And in a place like Guaranteed Rate Field or Rate Field, whatever, you're going to be able to hit the ball out of the ballpark to right because it gets up in the jet stream and it goes out to dead right field, out where the Miller Lite landing is. It's a great home run park for him. Now, he is big. He is a big dude. He's listed at 6'2", 213. I cannot imagine that he is lighter than 225. That's just what I'm saying. I look at him as somebody that is at minimum 225 pounds. He is a big, big dude, which limits his positional versatility. Now, he's listed as a third baseman and a first baseman. There's no question in my mind that he is going to end up playing exclusively first base because, number one, that's the White Sox biggest position of need. They have a lot of various options that they can play at third base. And he just doesn't seem to be a defensive plus over at third. And first base is really the place that you can, quote unquote, hide him. It is a deal that if he plays well, he's going to end up warranting more money on the open market. And you know what? That is what it is. That is the game that the White Sox are playing here. And you hope that when he's a free agent, going into the 2028 season, that he has played well enough to deserve a contract like that, and the White Sox are at a point where they feel like they can spend to keep him. Because at that point, he'll be 27 years old. He's going to turn 28, or rather, he'll turn 28 before the start of that season. His birthday is February 2nd, 2000, so he will be 26 in a little under a month. The thing about him in terms of why he took a 2-year deal for only $34 million is that his strikeout numbers are a big problem. Like, there's no beating around the bush that his strikeout numbers in a far inferior league are a huge issue. In 2023, he struck out 168 times in 496 at bats. That's 168 over 496. And as I do math here as we're recording, that is a strikeout rate of 34%. 34%. Now, this past year where he was limited by injury, he had 72 strikeouts in 220 at bats. That's a strikeout rate of 32%. We consider, at least I consider, a 25% strikeout rate to be bad. A 32 to 35% strikeout rate. If you look at his career across all levels, he has struck out 1,068 times in 3,515 at bats. So over the course of an 8-year professional sample, that's a strikeout rate of 30.4%. He is a 30% strikeout rate guy. And when you look at a guy that at times has hit in the 300s, it is the equivalent of the true outcomes guy. Like, he's going to hit doubles. He's not going to hit triples, but he is going to strike out a lot. He's also going to walk a lot. He had multiple seasons, 3 different seasons of 100-plus walks. So he's going to get on base. He is going to hit home runs, and he's going to strike out. But if you're the White Sox, it's no different than if you were dealing with this in terms of Andrew Vaughn, or if you're dealing with this in terms of Lenyn Sosa, or if you're dealing with this in terms of Tim Elko, who, and we'll get to him a little bit later on because he is back in the White Sox news. It's a guy that is going to give you a lot of jolt in the middle of the lineup, assuming he makes contact. But again, you're not going to find anybody for the price point that a power hitting first baseman comes at. You're not going to find anybody that is going to put up that type of productivity from a power perspective that you can pay that little money to. The example I want to give in terms of a comparable is Pete Alonso. Now, Pete Alonso is much older. Pete Alonso is 31 years old. And he just signed a 5-year, $155 million contract that is going to take him through age 36. Pete Alonso is a guy that over the course of his career, which, let it be known, and granted, it's much different levels, but Pete Alonso has been at the highest level of American professional baseball for a smaller amount of time than Munetaka Murakami has been at the top of his. Granted, it's 1 year. I may be picking straws here. But Pete Alonso's strikeout rate is at 26.1% over the course of his career. So 5% about higher career strikeout rate for a younger guy that you pay a lot less. I mean, 5 years, $155 million for a guy that's 5 years older. That's $31 million a year. You are getting Murakami for average annual value of $14 fewer million per year than the Orioles are paying Pete Alonso. To me, it's a smart investment by the White Sox. It is a low risk, high reward, and you just have to accept what he is. You have to accept his deficiencies, because if his deficiencies weren't there, number one, he's not signing for only 2 years. Number two, he's not signing for only $34 million. And number three, he's not signing with the White Sox. He's signing with the Mets or the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Dodgers or the Mariners or the Rangers or the Tigers or somebody that spends more money consistently than the Chicago freaking White Sox. You are hoping that the highest of highs with him will put him on the level of the guys that you normally could not afford to sign. That you're going to get the Pete Alonso type numbers from him. The guy that's going to hit 35 and drive in 120. Now, those two benchmarks together, rare. Those are Barry Bonds-like numbers. But if you can get that out of him and have him as your first baseman of the next 2 years, if he's great, you find a way to keep him around long term and have him be a part of your core. And you spend the money to do so. If he's not great, then you hopefully have developed somebody to replace him. And that's all you can ask for on a 2-year deal. Now, what does this mean for Lenyn Sosa? What is this going to mean for Miguel Vargas? What is this effectively going to mean for Andrew Benintendi as a designated hitter if Murakami ends up taking a lot of the reps at DH? I think there's going to be a lot to be decided with the White Sox positionally moving forward into spring training. But you've got Maedroth, Montgomery, Murakami, Sosa, Vargas as your 5 key infield pieces. You also have Curtis Mead, who has positional versatility. You've got Brooks Baldwin, who's got positional versatility, and who I would hope is going to end up playing more outfield than infield. But you've got guys. You've got guys. You've got a core of young players that is only going to continue to get better. Not to mention Kyle Teal and Edgar Caro. Now, how, again, they're going to end up balancing this out? I mean, it's the question that we've been asking for months on months on months, and we still don't know. We still have no idea how that's going to end up working and whether or not Teal is going to end up playing a good amount of outfield or whether one of those guys is going to end up getting shopped for somebody else. I don't think they're going to trade either one of those guys, but you cannot close the door in case there's a deal out there that you can't say no to. And I think we're going to find out once spring training comes around where a lot of the White Sox upper-level prospects are and how they fit into this year's team, specifically Braden Montgomery. You know, Braden Montgomery is the one outfield prospect that I think White Sox fans are hoping is going to fit into the puzzle a little bit quicker than the rest of the White Sox position player prospects. Pitching is a whole nother story, and we're going to get to that in our next part of the show. But, you know, I look at the way that Braden Montgomery has played in just a short amount of time being a 22-year-old. He is an uber-talented player. In the fall league, he was tremendous. Now, the fall league only played 12 games. Hit .366, on base of .527. 1 homer, 11 ribbies in 41 at-bats. Fall league is a good barometer. You know, across all levels of the minors last year, hit .270, 12 homers, 68 runs driven in. Got all the way up to Double-A. Is he going to start the year on the big league roster? No, not a chance. But is he somebody that should be starting outfielder post-trade deadline 2026? You better believe your butt he will, or at least I expect him to be. And then you get a couple of other acquisitions that are extremely complementary to the rest of this team. They made a trade, and I remember covering this guy when he was in the minors because he was a long time. Actually, I have the wrong guy in my head. I was thinking of Dustin Peters, who was a former Dodger. The White Sox picked up Tristan Peters, who at AAA Durham over 136 games last year hit 15 homers, drove in 76 runs, hit 266. This sounds like a guy that's going to be on the big league roster, who's only 25 years old and had a really good career at Southern Illinois. In the Missouri Valley, he hit 355 his final year. 6 homers, 55 runs driven in. Dude can play. There's no doubt that he can play. He's got a little pop. He's got a long sample at AAA. Like over the last 2 years at AAA, he's played in, if I can do math properly in my head, which sometimes is a struggle, which shouldn't be as a stat guy. He's played 259. See, I told you I struggled. He's played 259 AAA games over the last 2 seasons. And he made his big league debut at the end of last year with the Rays. And now he's with the White Sox. And, what they gave up to get him was a player to be named later. He had been DFA'd. He's only 25 years old. He joins another guy that a previous organization gave up on in Everson Pereira, who also came from the Rays. And you know what? If guys are coming from the Rays, which is an organization that develops a plethora of talent, I mean, I can't be excited about Derek Hill, but I can be excited for what Pereira and Peters bring to the table. I mean, one of these two guys is going to be a starting outfielder at some point on opening day. I guess some point on opening day seems like a little bit like, trickling it a little bit too far down the road. But one of these guys is going to be a starting outfielder on opening day. So will Andrew Benintendi, probably. Now, Luis Robert is the biggest question, and we'll get to him in the second part of our show. The other acquisition that the White Sox have made, 2 acquisitions that they've made, one of them I actually think is a really, really good signing given the deficiencies the White Sox have in the outfield. But I'm going to get to Sean Newcomb first because Sean Newcomb is somebody that I remember covering when he was in college. He was a first-round pick, and by all accounts, he did not live up to his billing as a starting pitcher. He got to the big leagues with the Braves in 2017, 2 years after he was drafted. He's got a career ERA of 4.20, but they gave up on him as a starter. Braves had him in the bullpen during their championship season in 2021, but he only pitched in 32 games. I don't know if he was on the roster during the championship run. He's bounced around a little bit. Went to the Cubs in 22 after, I think, based on his numbers, I have to imagine the Braves cut him. And then was with the A's in 23, 24. Had a really good year with the A's last year, and then was picked up by the Red Sox, where he moved back into the rotation. So the White Sox signed him for 1 year, $4.5 million, and he's going to be basically their primary reliever from the left side out of the bullpen because Frazier Ellard has decided to retire. And that leaves you with him, and that leaves you with Brandon Eisert, really, as your reliable left-handed relievers. I mean, Tyler Gilbert is still on the roster. I don't know how big of a factor he's going to play onto this team this year. But, Sean Newcomb, I think, has finally found what he is as a pitcher. And, if you're going to strike out a batter per inning from the left side, $4.5 million for somebody that has been there and done that, and relatively speaking has been healthy the last couple of years, I'm for it. Now, he wasn't healthy for a lot of 2023, but, if he's out there for $4.5 million and he's going to be a reliable seventh or eighth inning guy, something that the White Sox need, I got no problem with it. I have no problem with it whatsoever. And then the last guy that they picked up that I am honestly thrilled for, because this is somebody that everybody thought was going to be, I should say, one of the next big things. And that's Jared Kelenic. Jared Kelenic is coming to the White Sox on a minor league deal. It is a non-roster invitee, and I just think based on who Jared Kelenic is, that he should end up on the big league roster. This is a guy that was a former 6th overall pick that was part of a huge trade that sent Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz to the Mets from the Mariners. And he has not really at the big league level proven that he can hit for average. He had a solid 2024 with the Braves in what was his second life after leaving Seattle. 15 homers, 45 driven in, 231 average. Strikes out 133 times and 412 at bats, so that's not good. And last year he completely bottomed out with the Braves. But if by chance he can find something and he can be what he was in 2024 in Atlanta, and that's just a serviceable guy with power, if he can be close to, a 15 homer guy, then you've found a starting outfielder for basically nothing. I mean, the White Sox are getting a former top 10 pick, a former future franchise center fielder, right fielder, for basically nothing. Now, maybe he's completely cooked, and all of these poor numbers at the AAA level with the Braves last year are indicative of the lack of future for his career, but he's only 25. So maybe he has some life left. I'd like to think that he does, because if he does, and if he can prove to be a starting caliber level outfielder, I think the White Sox have found one of their starting outfielders for this next year, and maybe he's good enough to where you sign him to an extension and he becomes immediately a stopgap outfielder for the next couple of years. And if he's good and somebody wants him, you can flip him. You can easily flip him. So I'd say what Chris Getz is doing right now is a really, really, really good way to go about filling in around the edges, adding some impact, but trusting in the core that you are developing internally. This is not a quick rebuild, but the pieces that are going to be impact pieces are starting to come to the forefront. And some of the guys that are getting brought in, maybe they're here beyond next year, but they're setting the bridge to the guys that will be here when the White Sox are good. So we had made mention of in our last episode, which was 3 weeks ago, that the White Sox were going to have a Rule 5 draft, and they picked 2 players in the Rule 5 draft. And I'm not confident that either one of them is going to end up actually sticking with the team. Now, one came from the Rays in Alexander Alberto. He was their second Rule 5 pick. Their first came from the Red Sox in right-hander Jetixon Paez, a Venezuelan 21-year-old who last season got all the way up to High A Greenville in the Red Sox org. He had a 2.79 ERA in 7 starts, 19 and a third innings, 23 strikeouts to just 3 walks. And Alexander Alberto is a big guy as well. Like 6'8", 203 is what he's listed at. He's out of the Dominican. Last season, he got up as high as High A Bowling Green. By the way, that ballpark is phenomenal. If you're ever in Bowling Green, Kentucky, highly recommend that you go. But split between Low A Charleston and High A Bowling Green, he appeared in 42 games out of the pen, 2.59 ERA, 48 and two-thirds innings, 21 walks, and 64 strikeouts. I understand that the upside is there with guys like these who both reportedly have phenomenal stuff. But the problem that I have is that they're both guys that were Rule 5 eligible at a very young age. Now, Alberto's 24, Paez is only 21. Now, Paez, I think, has the higher upside because he's younger and he's gotten to a higher level faster, as he started off in the Dominican Summer League with the Red Sox in 2021 and had a 2.86 ERA over 13 starts and has been really solid at every level that he's been at. But it's just hard for me to look at where these two guys are relative to their experience and feel like both of them can stick on the big league roster for an entire year. I'm just not confident that that's going to end up being the case. And, you know, I hope that they might find a spot in the bullpen, that one of them sticks, but there's a good chance if they don't perform to the standard of what the White Sox expect out of their bullpen in spring training, that one or both of them could end up getting returned. So you really picked two wild cards here and two guys that nobody really knows a whole lot about. So we're going to really have to wait and see and actually find out based upon how they pitch in spring training and if one of them makes a big league roster, if these guys can stick the whole year. Because in the Rule 5, if you're not on the roster the entire year, you got to be returned to your organization. And thank goodness Shane Smith and Mike Vassell were so good that they both stuck with the organization and are now basically going to be long-term parts of this White Sox pitching staff. And I think the White Sox are going to have really open competitions all over the place for spots in rotation, spots in the bullpen. I mean, realistically speaking, the only spots that are effectively accounted for at this point in the bullpen are, I should have made mention of when we talked about Sean Newcomb that they had picked up Chris Murphy, who is also a lefty. So him and Newcomb are your two lefties out of the pen. I think Anthony Kay is part of the rotation. Certainly Shane Smith and Davis Martin are big parts of the rotation. We're going to have to figure out how this collection of pitching ends up coming together to break camp. But I think there are going to be some guys that you've seen in the past that end up on the team, aka the Drew Thorpes and the Kai Bushes of the world. And there's a good chance that you may end up seeing the end of Jonathan Cannon or potentially the end of Sean Burke. We will find out as spring training goes along, but I don't think the White Sox are done adding pitching because I have a feeling that a lot of that young pitching is going to end up coming in the form of a trade for Luis Robert Jr. And there were a lot of rumors that were flying around, at least before Christmas time, about Luis Robert Jr. getting traded to the Cincinnati Reds for a lot of young, controllable pitching. And there are more rumors that are flying around. One's from the Yankees, one's from the Braves, one's from the Dodgers, one's from the Mets. I mean, there are a lot of suitors for Luis Robert Jr. And I guess the question is, do you want to keep him around and sell him higher, or do you cut your losses with somebody that hasn't been the same player that he was the first 4 years he was at the big league level. Like, there's no beating around the bush that Luis Robert Jr. is not the same player that he was when he first got to the White Sox. There's no denying that his fall off has been tremendous. And with a guy that is not going to really be a part of your future, I don't see why at this point. I don't see why you keep him around for anything. I mean, he's not going to be the reason why you win more games in 2026 because he was fully a part of the worst team in the history of the franchise and was a part of another 100-loss team this past year. Luis Robert Jr. is not the answer. And I don't feel like you have to hold on to him just for the sake of trying to get the best deal possible. He is going to be viewed as a 1-year contract that we have an affordable option on for the following year if he plays well. And if he doesn't, he gets bought out and he floats around and probably ends up, being a fourth outfielder somewhere. I don't think you can overvalue Luis Robert Jr. in the trade market at this point. And so at some point, this domino is going to fall. Somebody is going to outbid somebody else. And you're not going to end up seeing, big league level talent, or rather big league guys on the established big league roster talent coming back for Luis Robert Jr. You're going to see a lot of high-level prospects come back from him. This isn't like when the Bears traded with the Panthers for picks and ended up getting DJ Moore back. Like, that's not how this is going to work. This is going to work a whole lot differently. And however it shakes out, whatever you feel like is going to be the best return is going to be pitching. Pitching and outfield. The more pitching you can bring into the organization, the better. Because I trust where the White Sox are at outfield-wise, building toward the future, than I do pitching-wise. And that's why I feel like you have to be careful to a point with what you get back for him, but you can't overanalyze it because anything is better than nothing, and nothing is holding on to a depreciating asset who could end up being an appreciating asset for another organization, but as seen with what Andrew Vaughn did in Milwaukee, it might be time for a change of scenery. It might be time to finally flush out the change the game era of the White Sox, of which Luis Robert is the last surviving member. And with that, we say goodbye. Happy New Year on Believe in White Sox, and hopefully we'll have some more acquisitions and maybe some clarity on what your projected 2026 roster is going to look like entering spring training. Take care, everybody.